Kia ora and welcome back, everybody. In this video, I'm going to be reacting to former Special Air Service Commander, New Zealand Special Air Service Commander, Jamie Pennell. This is a short video that he's done here. It's not the full 2-hour plus long interviews that he's done with other ones. I'll react to those videos, or to at least one of those videos, later on down the track. So let's get into it. Okay, now get to its full screen. I'm going to hit play.
Jamie, thanks very much for coming on 30. Really appreciate your time.
Great to be here.
Who dares wins? It's the motto of the SAS, and it's the final words of your book. Who dares wins? What does it mean to you?
Who dares wins means basically, those who dare win. Basically, it's taking calculated risks and making sure that you achieve the objective no matter what, and being able to deviate from the plan at times. Obviously, when you have a plan, it only survives past right up to the start line, and then past that point, you need to be able to adapt that. And I think the who dares wins attitude was definitely shown in the Intercontinental Hotel when we resolved that particular attack.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah, we will come to that, obviously, hearing what the host is saying. It's fairly self-explanatory, eh? Like, well, to me it is anyway. Even as a young soldier, when I was going through and going on selection in NZ, who dares wins just made sense to me. It was a no-brainer. So I lit up with a smile there just hearing Jamie having to or listening to Jamie explain it. The calculated risk part is probably the portion that's more important for viewers that may not understand. Who dares wins isn't just about taking risks and being callous with it and not worrying about any consequences. As Jamie mentioned, about the calculated risks with regards to daring and striving to do something that other people may think is not achievable. So it's good to hear him sort of touch on that briefly. So we'll see how the rest of this goes.
Because that really is probably it was the big one for you, wasn't it? And so we'll talk about that. You wanted to join the SAS in your teens. You're in the army at 19. You had one failed attempt to trying to get into the SAS, and you were badged at about 21. How tough is it to get?
You know what? I never knew that about Jamie. I never knew that he attempted selection once before, and whatever happened, he didn't get through that first one. So there's a bit of an insight there. And so for anybody that has attempted selection, New Zealand, Australia, UK, wherever, or you're the American Special Forces, Canadian Special Forces, wherever you are, if you've attempted selection, there's another living example of the fact that, hey, it is tough. You can fail. It is all right. It doesn't define who you are, but you can pick yourself up, you can pick your lip up, and you can get back on the horse and you can go again. And clearly Jamie did that and smashed it, and has gone on to serve an incredibly long career within that particular unit within the army, which is very difficult to do. And he's done so to a extremely high level. So that's great to know. I didn't know that about Jamie, that he had failed a selection before. I suppose it's not things that people go around talking about. Oh yeah, I failed this. I failed selection, then went back and did it again. But it's never been a question that I've thought to ask anybody that I've served with either. Like even the guys that I served with in Australia, I never asked them, oh, did you pass your first time? Or was never I don't recall it ever being a conversation that you'd have with guys that were in the unit.
Get into the SAS?
It's very, very tough, and so it should be. It's as I said before, the most physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually difficult journey I've ever had in my entire life, and for good measure. We are selecting people who operate behind enemy lines for long durations of time under a huge amount of pressure, either in small teams or much larger teams. And we're looking at the individual at the highest function of any SAS soldier, carrying heavy weight on their back by day and night, any season, weather or terrain, under time pressure, sleep deprived, food deprived. And these are very real sort of things that you will experience in operations. Having been in operations and in training, we continue on that training in that sort of fashion. So we must have someone who is very, very robust and able to do that.
You write of your...
I'm thinking, well, I suppose that's the case because of the 30. There's a lot of information coming out, and I'm assuming he's needing to speak so quickly because he's only got 30 minutes, or this show was 30 with Guy and Espiner. So taking that into consideration, if it sounds like he's speaking fast, that may be, or that's likely because he's only got 30 minutes, but he's touched on a whole bunch of elements there. The question to him was, how hard is it to get into the SAS? It's almost like one of those how long's a piece of string type questions. It's, well, you could carry on down that rabbit hole for a long period of time, but I love the way Jamie's sort of summed it up in terms of what it was for him too. So it's nice to get that perspective, physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, the hardest thing that he had ever done at that time. I think I'm pretty confident, he's done a heck of a lot harder things since that time, but anybody that's completed a selection, you always have that point of reference that you can go to and draw strength from, energy from, courage, heart, whatever you want to call it. You can draw from that well as many times as you need when you've been through it, especially when you've passed it. So, yeah, cool to hear.
Second attempt that the only way I'd get pulled off would be if I was seriously injured, incapacitated, or dead. So the only one...
Very robust and able to do that.
Sorry, I missed...
You write of your second attempt that the only way I'd get pulled off would be if I was seriously injured, incapacitated, or dead. So that's the attitude they're looking for, right?
That's... It always amazes me how similar the mindsets are for individuals who come from very different walks of life, but how similar there's always some sort of common thread that binds, in my experience, that binds individuals that end up serving in the Special Air Service or in the Special Forces in general. They're typically cut from the same cloth, so maybe that's where that common thread comes into play. But what the guy just mentioned there about Jamie, when he wrote in his book, so clearly Jamie's an author as well, Serviceman J. I'll put some pictures in this video and some information in the description about it, links to it. But clearly there's a common mindset. He was only coming off selection if he was seriously incapacitated, getting removed from the course, or if he died. And that's pretty much the same mindset that I had going into the New Zealand selection and the Australian selection. And the amount of people that I've worked with, served with, that have been in the unit and or that have been in the UK in 22 or SBS, they've all shared very, very similar experiences. There was just no way they were removing themselves from course. They were going to have to be dragged off the course, or they were going to have to be that incapacitated that they couldn't physically move, so they stretch it off. And or third, the only other way they were coming off was if they died. And some people have died on the British SAS selection course, from what I understand. I don't know how many. I'm not sure if any have died in the New Zealand selection, and I don't know if any have died on the Australian selection course. But it is a reality. If you look at my reactions to the Australian SAS selection, part 1 and part 2, some of those features that you're going up on Happy Wanderer, and the times that you're alone, you are hundreds of kilometres out in the middle of nowhere by yourself. And if you injure yourself, if you fall and take a bad tumble, crack your head, break your neck, nobody's there. Nobody knows. There will be a search party, obviously. You get bitten by a snake, you've got no antivenom or anything on you to be able to deal with that high possibility of dying in that environment. So, yeah, those realities of dying, it's not a flippant comment. It's not an imaginary thought. A lot of guys, including myself, when we went in there, there's no way I'm coming off unless those other two things happen, or the third one is if I'm dead and then I'm found and then removed, obviously, because I'm unable to carry on. So really interesting, very cool how there's just such a common thread amongst operators.
Yep.
That you just aren't going to give up. Someone's going to have to pull you out of it.
Yep, just one foot in front of the other. And as I said before, that who dares wins attitude is you do not stop until the job is complete. And, really good in the regiment, having that mentality. Once you leave the regiment, now obviously we'll get into transition in a moment, but, that needs to be tempered as well. You can push yourself too far. If you don't keep an eye on things, you'll get to where I got to, which was burnout.
And there
Oh, interesting. It's cool that they're going to touch on transition in here as well. So that sounds good, because there's lots I could say about transition and difficulties and struggles just from my own, but then also, without naming names, other people that I've either served with or haven't served with directly, but have had the good fortune to interview them and to hear the challenges that they had to traverse in terms of their transition and reintegrating back into society, and even just reintegrating back into their homes, into their family. So, yeah.
are a number of misconceptions. I mean, some people would think it was the biggest, sort of bulkiest guys who would get through that sort of training, but often, and I went to Afghanistan with the SAS, a lot of them were quite wiry guys, weren't they? Quite the skinny guys.
Yeah, that's right. And
what's that about? Less.
It comes back to that. And, I think, Dan Hooker says the best, that you can't teach ticker. It's something that he says, that UFC fighter. And, it does come down to this, but it's the mindset. And, I've seen all types, and, both as a soldier that's been part of the selection process, and as a directing staff taking the selection process and seeing.
I'm going to pause it there for a sec. Jamie was one of the directing staff, at least on my selection. So I knew I knew who he was, obviously, and his cycle, he must have been in the unit for about a year or close to a year. And then my selection was happening. My selection was around October, November of 1998 at that time. And he was one of the directing staff, at least for aspects of it. He wasn't a senior instructor in terms of the directing staff, but he was one of the badged operators who was one of the staff. And he made a comment when we were sitting in the compound for one of the aspects there, just sitting behind our pack waiting for the next lot of instructions, and he come walking through, and I think he said, "Put up your hands if you think you're going to pass this selection." And I sat there and I don't recall putting up my hand. I just sat there. The reason that I didn't put up my hand is because I didn't want to. I had in my head this be the grey man. So I didn't want to stand out. I didn't want to be like, "Yep, I'm going to pass this selection course," and then all of a sudden they're going to be like, "Boom! Oh, candidate, this person here, he reckons he's going to pass. Okay, so we're going to keep needling that guy." So I just kept quiet to myself. So it's interesting seeing him. And yeah, when he speaks of having been on both sides in the New Zealand SA selection as a candidate and then as a directing staff, you definitely get to see all sorts of people come through and get to see things from a different light. And like me, if you've watched some of the Australian reactions, wondering how I fared, how did I go, it would be great to see footage just for my own sort of knowledge and information. Man, how bad did I look? And what sort of shape was I presenting when I was coming into the checkpoints? Was I organised? Did I have all my buttons done up? Were my clips done up? Was I standing up, holding my weapon with two hands properly, with hand on the pistol grip and finger outside the trigger guard? Was I doing all those little things? Was my J hat on properly, or my jungle hat, bush hat? Was my lanyard done up properly? Just all these things I wonder to myself, because they are traits and they are things that the unit looks at during selection. And here he's just been asked, it's not usually, or the host is saying, why is it mostly smaller, wiry looking guys instead of the big, bulkier guys? What's that all about? So Jamie's touched on that and said it's about this. And he's used Dan Hooker, the UFC fighter, as the point of reference. That's a great comment. I've not heard that before. You can't teach ticker, from Dan Hooker. So great comment. I agree with that statement. That is something that at least for me, I observed over time through watching my mum work the way that she worked hard, through watching others work hard, and through seeing people persist and overcoming the obstacles that were in front of them. So those sort of trailblazers, those leaders, have really helped shape me, and those things have helped shape my ticker, for want of a better term. So, yeah, awesome.
And guys come through the regiment, and kind of the selection process goes all the way through your career. You cannot really point out who is going to make it. Some guys who are quite big and have a big engine on them can actually move very, very quickly and faster than us wiry guys, you know what I mean, and can go further than we can, and vice versa. You can have guys that are actually skinnier and shorter than I am, that are carrying half their weight on their back, and they can just eat it up. And it's it's amazing sort of environment to be in, very highly competitive.
That's awesome. Again, everything that he's speaking about then, when you got the smaller guys, the skinnier guys, and they're carrying the same amount of weight as you, so me as a larger person on the selection course, for them that weight is probably about close to 50% of their body weight. For me, it's nowhere near 50% of my body weight, because I was bigger and bulkier, and I was fortunate enough to have trained well enough that I could support my weight and that I could shift and move my weight when I needed to. But when you look at these smaller guys, I would think to myself, man, how they're carrying the same weight as me on their back. I'm bigger than them. I'm pretty sure I'm stronger than them. That was my thought. I may have been wrong, but I would think to myself, I'm pretty sure I'm stronger than them. I'm pretty sure I can lift more weight than them. So that's what I was measuring it on. But I overlooked this and this, their mind and their heart and their spine, if I'm being honest, the ability for them to just push and keep pushing. And for a lot of those people that were smaller, skinnier, smaller, would have blitzed me. I would keep going, yep. But there's some animals there that just, man, they just, like he said, they just eat it up and they hammer it. So interesting and very true. It's not the bigger, bulkier guys, muscle bodybuilder types that get in.
Are there women in the SAS now?
Not badge members yet. We have had women who have attempted selection but haven't got that far. But that's not to say that that'll never happen in the future. So yeah.
And do you feel that there is a place for women?
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, we have enablers who operate within our teams, and I've had women on my teams that have been out on the ground with me. And you need those people to be able to support the mission and achieve it.
What a great question, asking about, and even better answer from Jamie. So, yeah, I am aware that there have been females attempt selection, but at this stage, even to this day, 2025, there haven't been, not that I'm aware of, there haven't been any females successfully complete the whole of selection. But man, huge tip cap and kudos to those females, to those wahine toa that, go and put their hat in the ring with these other males and turn up. So it will likely happen at some stage one day. But it is, I have no idea when that's going to happen. Like Jamie said, when people rock up for selection, you can't even pick who's going to be still there at the end, who's going to pass, who's going to fail. Some of those who you think have got no chance end up being there at the end. And some of those who you think that guy looks fit, strong, ready to go, seems to have a good attitude, are not there. They pull off within the first 24, 48, 72 hours. So probably, yeah, like you said, just a matter of time before a female makes it through. It'll be interesting, the dynamics. They definitely, as he mentioned and used the term enablers, there's definitely roles and definitely roles and opportunities within the unit like that to serve and contribute and to help in so many ways, with regards to intelligence gathering, with regards to hearts and minds, just with the presence that they can bring, with regards to being in a foreign country and trying to negotiate, communicate, elicit information, intelligence, for want of a better term, to help your team, to help the bigger strategic focus, sort of looking ahead, as well as the tactical, operational, and the ground stuff. So, yeah, very cool.
Let's talk about getting deployed. You went into Kandahar, and there was a reconnaissance mission there that the SAS was going to fulfill. but you didn't have vehicles. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the innovation, and I guess this is part of it. You write in your book that you got 8 desert Humvees for 4 bottles of whiskey and some trays of Lion Red from the Americans. Did you actually have to trade booze for essential equipment?
Yeah, well, you don't get something for nothing. You got to grease the cogs to get these sort of things. I'm sure the Americans are going to help us out anyway, but again, we're not going to trade for air, so that's what we had, and we thought that was pretty good currency at the time, and they did too. So yeah, no, it was really good. I mean, when we first went over there in Concord 1, basically the boys, as in the badge guys that were over there, were doing essentially foot patrols, long range reconnaissance foot patrols, and then that progressed into mobility, which was the tour that I was on. Pretty much jumped straight into it. So yeah, that's how things evolved, and that enabled us to get out across large swathes of land. And do a hell of a lot more than just, sort of being in one sort of small isolated point.
And you're an outrider at this point. You're on a Kawasaki 250 farm bike, effectively.
Yeah, at the time, yeah. So that's all we had to operate with, and you operate with what you have. You know what I mean?
So you got the main guys in the Humvees, and then your outriders, 2 of you.
Correct. Yep. So they're out in front, route finding, early warning, and a number of other jobs that you need to do. And that, for me, was the best possible position to be in, because you can actually get away from the convoy. You can basically travel anywhere you feel like you want to go, up into the mountains, high up into the mountains. So you've got a good vantage point to be able to give the convoy comms on what was happening. But it was good because, after that particular tour, and when we came back in 2004, we actually got our motorbikes upgraded to KTM 525s, which are a completely different beast. So we sort of learned our lesson. But at the end of the day, like I said, you don't moan about it. You have what you got. And
no, sure, but I'm interested in the innovation, because having fewer
would have been good if I know I'm probably nobody to talk, but just coming in over the top of Jamie when he's still got some stuff to say. You've brought him onto your show to interview him. Like, let him finish what it is that he's trying to say. I know I'm pausing in between, but I'm doing my best to pause after Jamie's spoken, rather than cutting him off midstream or talking over him. He may have been nearing the end of what it is that he's going to say, but as the host, like, let him speak, bro. Let him finish what it was that he was going to say. Even if he only had a handful of words left, let him finish his sentence. So he just got cut off there. And so that's poor form, but great to hear him speaking about they had some whiskey and some Lion Red trays, which the Americans felt was good currency. But that's also a part of what Jamie's talking about. You don't get something for nothing. Like, yeah, the Americans likely would have helped anyway, and they're a huge force. They've got so much resources. And the ones that you meet and that you work with, or that you have an opportunity to connect with and communicate with or seek support with, man, they're so willing to help their coalition partners. And what a blessing and privilege it is to have the Americans as an ally, to be associated with them, because yeah, they're awesome. They are awesome. Hey, there's bad eggs in every group. There's bad eggs in the special forces, no matter where they are in the world, New Zealand, Australia, UK, America, etc. There's a few bad apples everywhere. Doesn't matter what sort of industry or work that you do. But when you come across and meet the ones that are good and that are on the same page and that are there to help and aren't asking for much in return, they got some whiskey and some alcohol. I don't drink. Whatever your opinions are of that being exchanged in operational circumstances and all that sort of thing, that's your opinion. These guys know what they're doing. They trust each other. They understand the stakes. There is an outlet for them. There is times when they need to have an outlet, and so they'll find those ways where they can. And if that means having a couple of drinks with their mates, just like Christian Craighead spoke about in the other reaction video that I did, finding your thing to help you settle, to help you calm, whether that's exercise, whether that's reading, whether that's meditation, whether that's having a couple of drinks with your mates, whatever it is, find and do that thing that helps you sort of recenter yourself and get yourself good to go. So yeah, I've got no issue with what Jamie's talking about there. And yeah, they got as a smaller country and with at times, and I don't know what it's like now, but clearly then there are times where they didn't have equipment that they needed to be able to do their job as effectively as what they could have. But Kiwis and special forces in general are innovative, so they'll come up with ways and find ways to try to get to where they need to get to, and or develop and or make things so that they can perform the job, that they're there to do. So yeah,
resources means you have to innovate, right? I think you talk about getting old bedposts from the dump and making sort of things on your back of your trucks and things. I mean, real sort of number 8 wire Kiwi stuff.
Yeah, 100%. You know, the boys are always going to do it. We're always trying to evolve to make ourselves better and operate more effectively. You're not ever going to have all the gear all of the time.
And is that an advantage in some ways?
100%, I think so. Yeah, and you learn that on our software training as well. You know, being innovative. But yeah, I mean, we had like I said, we had to go down the dump, getting bed frames, making those into weapon mounts. I think the only manufactured weapon mount was for the main weapon, which is good. But you know, getting plywood, making boxes for all our gear and our food and stuff like that, and we could make it how we wanted to make it. You know what I mean? Each vehicle was slightly different. But
was that noticed by the other forces?
Yeah, it was actually. Yeah, and we did have not on my tour, but on one of the previous tours, I think they had one of the US Special Forces guys come down just to see what we were doing, and they took note of how we did our vehicle setups. I mean, you know, our lineage is back to the LRDG, so it's although we may not have thought about that at the time, you know what I mean, we kind of still had that mentality. That's exactly what they were doing way back in the day.
I'm going to pause that there. I was about to cut them off and hit pause, doing what I said not to do, but maybe I should have, because now I'm trying to remember. Oh, that's right. So you're speaking about the innovation and the going to the dump. I think the host was talking about there, and getting things and manufacturing things. Jamie also mentioned when he was asked, do you think that's an advantage? And he said 100%. I agree with that too. I think when you're limited by resources, when you're restricted by what you have or don't have, and or same with what you can or can't do, it forces you to think outside the box. It forces you to come up with solutions rather than just focusing on the problem, rather than just focusing on how we can't do this. It forces you to come up with other ways rather than focusing on, if only I had this, then I could do this. Oh, but hang on, we've got this. Maybe I could adapt that to do this, etc., etc. And one of the things that stuck out for me was not just in this part, but thinking about my time in the Australian one when we deployed and we were in Iraq at the time. I was on my vehicle. We had the Mark 19 gun, which was the main gun, and that was my job. I was in the turret, had the driver, had the PC in my vehicle, and I still wanted, and so did the PC, thankfully, I still wanted to have some sort of weapon mounted that could get rounds down range, not just the Mark 19, the 40mm grenade launcher. Great weapon, awesome weapon, but I still wanted something with, you know, some bullets that could spread the ground a little bit more and give a bit more coverage if need be. And my patrol commander wanted the same thing. So there's actually, he spoke with, and we were lucky, we didn't have to makeshift anything. We had the armourers, the vehicle guys, all the support that was there, just phenomenal. Awesome people. They worked tirelessly, day and night, trying to provide modifications and things to help us, those of us that were going to be crossing the border and going into Iraq. And so I had a 7.62 mounted. So I had the Mark 19 in the front, and then in my turret on the back, there was a 7.62 mounted there, so I could swing the turret around and then get 7.62 rounds downrange if we needed to. General purpose machine gun that was mounted to the turret as well. And then we discovered other sort of issues that would swing and whack me in the back. So it was good that we got to figure out all of those. And then the mechies and all that sort of stuff, or mechanics, they fixed it so that I could have a locking pin. So it's locked it in place so it wouldn't swing around and come whacking me in the back or anything like that, it stayed locked where it was, so it didn't matter what bumps we went over, the gun just stayed where it was. It cleared the turret, so nothing was banging into me, and I could operate the main gun as need be, and or I could swing it around, unlock the 7.62 gun, keep it on the mount, and then use that to put rounds down. So the ingenuity and innovation that we didn't have to go to any rubbish tip to manufacture it ourselves, but the ideas flow and the thoughts of how can we make this work start to come up. And so that's what I think, and why I agree with Jamie's comment about being limited on resources is a bit of an advantage in terms of unlocking this and getting you to think more broadly and outside the box and be more solutions focused, like genuinely solutions focused, not just using that term, but then still just trying to find the thing that you think you need in order to be able to meet the task. So, yeah.
So there is innovation, and that's good. But is there a point even now where we're not putting enough resource into the SAS? I mean, I've seen recent reporting by the Herald this year that the CDF was told the SAS was near collapse. Some were paid a $30,000 retention fee. Saw another report in August from the Herald that people were buying their own boots. Now, I know you're out of it now, but have you got any thoughts about whether we are resourcing the SAS properly?
I think from what I've heard, I think we're very well resourced. You know, it's equip the man, not man the equipment, is the sort of the narrative that we use. But yeah, I don't hear anything other than, you know, that the boys have got what they need to do the job. And I was there as most recently as last year, I suppose, when they were sort of putting things on display, and they're in a hell of a lot better position than we ever were, you know what I mean? So yeah, I mean, again, I can't speak for that because I've been out a while, but to me, it looks pretty good.
They got that, what they.
That's great to hear, especially from his perspective. Obviously, this was a little while ago, this interview, but the fact that he's still being connected to and with the unit, and no doubt in some sort of way he probably still is to this day, I don't know. But he's got a pretty good idea. He's got his finger on the pulse. He's seen the equipment and with some of the displays, and like you said, they're in a lot better position than what they were in when he was in. So, which you'd expect. You'd expect that to be adapting and evolving and equipping the soldiers. And the other part, which I heard him mention, was equip the man, not man the equipment. So that's another great take. You know, it's all well and good to have all this equipment, but if you don't have the staff or the manning for it, or the soldiers to be able to use that equipment, well, then you potentially invested a heck of a lot of money in gear that is potentially going to become outdated, and then you need to get new gear. So equip the man, make sure that the operators have got everything that they need to be able to do their job well and to the standards expected, rather than getting all the bells and whistles and then you don't even have the operators to be able to use all that gear. And then by the time, and if you ever do, that equipment becomes obsolete or outdated, and then you've got to get new gear, but you've already used the budget. So now you can't get the new gear. You're stuck with these, I don't want to use the term relics, but I'll use it anyway. The gear is pretty good these days, but now you're stuck with this technically outdated gear.
And let's get to the big one, the Intercontinental Hotel siege. I mean, it's a utterly horrific scene when I'm reading it, incredibly compelling. But you've got this, 5-story building. You've got comms coming in saying that the terrorists are going to cut off guests' heads and throw the people off the building. You get there, these terrorists are on the roof. It's all guns blazing. I mean, reading your account of being fired at from above in a stairwell with grenades being lobbed down, are you surprised that you're here today talking to me about it?
Yeah. Yep. I mean, it was a big night. I'm going
to pause it there, even though I said I want to let him talk. Real direct, straight to the point. Are you surprised that you're even here? Yeah. So that is some of Kiwi humour, and that's clearly part of Jamie's personality in that as well, but just straight to the point. Yeah, like it's horrendous, horrific what they were faced with and what they were fighting. So let's let him tell the story.
just recently realised that it took us about 4 or 5 hours to get from the car park up to the roof, and that was really only halfway for us. But when I think about that time, it was about 30 minutes, you know what I mean? Like in a heartbeat. Like I never actually dwelled on that and had a sort of think about how long it actually took us to get up there. So, you know, the gun battle in the stairwell, I'm actually not too sure how long we were actually in there for. And that's very interesting, being in those sort of critical incidents, how, you know, time has played out. When people ask you how long you're in there, you feel like you're in there for maybe minutes. Could have been longer, and I don't think anyone would give you an accurate answer.
Because you're in a terrible position. You've got someone firing down at you from a stairwell. That is not a good place to be, is it?
No, not for anyone. And again, you have to make the decision about whether or not it's a great idea to keep pushing up. I mean, if that was the only option, then we would obviously plan and execute to go up there. But, you know, I guess we'll get into it about being in that state of flow. My mind was wide open and I could see other options.
Yeah, just to see.
Heart and courage, man. Bravery, skill, experience. Not that I'm saying that, I don't think he had that type of situation or scenario. I don't think he'd been involved in that type of scenario prior to this. But all the accumulation of the experience that he's developed over years of operational experience, training, recognizing and understanding and being thrown or having thrown at him a whole bunch of different scenarios and or situations that are happening or that could happen. All of that, it reminds me of Christian Craighead, the reaction that I did there when he talks about everything he did leading up to that incident at the hotel in Nairobi in Kenya prepared him, led him to that point. And I'm pretty sure that, you know, on reflection, if he hasn't already, Jamie would look back and go, yeah, everything he's done, connecting the dots, everything he did, everything he worked on, every course he did, every piece of training that he did, all the scenarios that adapted and changed at the drop of a hat, and he had to continue to be able to achieve the outcome. All of that stuff would have set him up to be the person in charge at that time, the one capable and able to maintain the whole operational and strategic picture, as well as looking out for his men and working with the men and just knowing that he could trust them to do their job. It's really impressive, super impressive to see and hear, but also interesting to hear him talk about his, you know, he couldn't tell you how long he was in there, and probably none of the team could probably give an accurate answer because they're so consumed and focused on the threat and the mission and what they need to do to be able to neutralize that threat and to achieve the mission. So
set that up for people. I mean, it is quite confronting in the book. You write when you get to the roof, there are satellite dishes up there as you'd expect on a big hotel. You see a leg coming out from behind this, and you think that you start shooting at it. Then you realize it's just a leg.
Yeah.
So people have detonated themselves, blown themselves up.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there was a lot going on at the time. Obviously, when we're having the gun battle in the stairwell, the initial contact with Steve Askin was such that they could hear us coming up.
Rest in peace, Steve Askin. I never knew the man, but people that I know that knew him, and Jamie in particular, who knows him and writes about him in his book, nothing but praise and positivity for that man. So rest in peace, Steve. Condolences to the family and to all your family, not just your spouse and children that you leave behind. So, yeah.
Stairwell, we were with the CRU at the time. We'd done nothing like this with them before. It was well above.
So just for people, that's the crisis response unit. Are these Afghan forces? Okay, but they're not elite special force soldiers.
No, they weren't at that time.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So they hadn't done this before.
No, correct. We'd only really done, single-story, double-story dwellings, compounds, and bits and pieces.
So you're realising this is on us.
Yeah, I could tell that straight away. As soon as we got into the lobby at the bottom of the hotel, I knew that we had to take the lead, and that was it. Usually we'd just enable, but we had to take the lead on this one and just get them doing what we needed to do. So, yeah, made a lot of noise going up the stairwell. They knew we were coming up. They sent a guy down. Steve Askin was the lead assaulter. They came around and basically from me to you, maybe a metre and a half away. Both raised their weapons, started firing, both fired. Steve hit the mark, the other guy didn't, but he sort of dropped to the ground and ran straight back up the top of the stairwell, got to the top. And looking at some of the footage afterwards, he lay on the ground up the top on the roof. His mate came over and talked to him, and I think he talked about how he's going to detonate himself, moved away, detonated himself, took both of them out, which was a win for us. And then we had a helicopter flying around the top of the hotel as well with 2 helo snipers in it, and they were engaging terrorists at the same time. So
I'm going to pause it there just because there's a lot that he's talking about, and it may seem that he's being very casual or blasé about it because he's not using all this emotion and energy when he's speaking, and he's not being animated and all that sort of stuff. For anybody watching this, particularly those from another country, not part of Aotearoa or Australia, outside of New Zealand and Australia, you may or may not be aware that this is just their personality. Like, this is just who they are. They're not over the top flamboyant about it. They're not looking to try to dolly it up or dress it up more than what it is. He's just speaking in very plain English, very just sort of like matter of fact. He's not being arrogant or cocky about it. He's just explaining, he's answering the question. This is what happened. Not trying to fluff it up for Hollywood or anything like that, because it doesn't need to be. But for some people, they may be wondering, or that may be wondering, why does he just seem so deadpan? Why is he just, he's just rolling straight through what sound like very critical and intense moments. And guy is like literally a meter away from you. Your mate is raising the weapon, firing, hits the mark. The enemy fires as well, but drops on the ground, but then gets back up and runs to the roof, then blows himself up. He's just talking about this stuff, like it happened yesterday, obviously, because he was there in amongst it. But don't think that the lack of energy or emotion, I don't know if those are the right terms, color and all that sort of stuff that you might expect to hear when people are describing things or telling stories, that's just a typical that's a typical New Zealander right there in terms of how he's talking and what he's explaining. And I know many Australians, and we'll get to that when we have a look at Mark Donaldson and Ben Roberts-Smith, when they're talking about their stuff as Victoria Cross winners, they're just down to earth, regular guys that are just asked the question and then they're just responding and answering it.
We had some detonations going on there. So I guess going back to what you said at the start was that basically made the roof look like a butcher shop. There's arms and legs and heads and everything all over the place, and which is why I shot at a leg.
Do you still see that in your head?
Yeah, I mean, it's been into my brain. I don't think I'm affected by it in any way. I think our training, which
but how do you train for that?
Well, we train for hours and hours, day and night, both in New Zealand and overseas, get things as close as possible to realism as we can possibly get. And it just goes on and on and on. So when you get into that space, I can only talk for me personally, for others, maybe not so much, but, it's, again, I'm not trying to be a tough guy or anything like that. It's just a matter of fact. It's another day on the job. And, when I see that stuff, it's like, oh, yeah, okay, cool. What are we going to do next? I'm pretty mission focused all the way to a point where I'm having a shower and having a feed back in base.
Those are great points that he's talking about, because it's often hard for people to fathom or comprehend. How do you train for that? How do you train to get shot at? How do you train if your mate gets shot in front of you or dies? How do you train to deal with and cope with seeing traumatic events or situations or things that happen? And he touches on it there because he's only got 30 minutes in this interview. But the training, the whole bunch of training that you do does help prepare you to a point. And then I think for me, again, only speaking for me, and I'm definitely not going to try to speak for Jamie, but just interjecting with my 2 cents, you also, in and of yourself, you're volunteering to go and try to join the pointy end of the spear, right? To be told, you're putting up your hand saying, hey, here I am. If there's a situation, yep, I'm good to go. Send me, I want to go in there. So there's a part of you and the ownership on you to understand that this is a reality of what you could encounter, what you could come across. And so preparing for it, at least for me, I was already partially prepared for what could potentially happen, whether it was my mates, which thankfully it didn't happen in terms of mates-wise, but whether it could have been civilians or whether it could have been soldiers that we're fighting against. And sometimes those things did happen in the military and in the private sector. And you see things that are burnt into your brain forevermore. And you can still have those things etched into your brain, scarring on your brain, but like Jamie said, but they can still not affect you. Then you can have other people that can have those same images or be involved in those same incidents that take it and process it very differently, or that struggle to process it, and it affects them massively to the point where they're just, they're burnt out, they can't deal with it, or there's other mental health issues that may be going on. So it's really interesting how the different dynamics and the different individuals, even though there's that common thread that binds operators of a special forces unit, there's also some significant differences in that as well, in terms of how things play out, either in the moment or after those moments have passed.
So you were that calm. Let's just have a closer look at that. You've got helicopters with snipers trying to take the terrorists out. So that's happening here. You've got the terrorists on the roof. You've got what you're doing. You're almost envisaging all this kind of in 3D. And you say in your book that you were as calm as you would be sitting on a couch watching a movie. You say you could see everything that was going on around me in my mind's eye, what was happening on the roof, on the stairs, who was down there. My brain was staying ahead of everything and seeing what was going to happen. I was just calm and in a flow state.
Wow.
Had you had that before?
No, haven't had it before, haven't had it since. I've probably had it at a lesser level, because at the end of the day, with flow states, you can either refocus yourself into the present moment. It's essentially being in the present moment all of the time and completely focused on the present moment. So we can refocus into that. Another one is challenge, and then another one is your life's on the line. And I think the life on the line one is we're at the peak. It was amazing. It made things super easy to think about. I mean, the fact that I could see the whole hotel in 3D. I knew where the stairwells were. I knew where we'd just come from. I could hear the shooting on the roof. There was, shooting going off the roof, up trying to hit the helicopter with our guys in it. There's shooting coming back down, hitting the roof as well. We're still in a contact inside the in the stairwell. But it's phenomenal. It's I can't say much more than that. It's just the calmness got me, I think. Just being super calm in that particular moment of chaos it was like a question mark in my head, thinking, hey, what's going on here?
So you actually noticed it at the time?
Yeah, I noticed it, but at the time, I didn't know I was in that flow state. I had too much to think about. I was just like, wow, I'm calm, and let's just get on with it.
You note too that before, when you're briefing your guys in the stairwell to take the roof, that you thought about those words.
I don't mind pausing it on the host speaking. I'll go back to hear what his question is after if I need to. But all I wanted to say in regards to what Jamie was describing there, I can see what I'm looking at is a person who is incredibly humble about what he's been through and what he was able to do. You could see him starting to articulate the 3D. He knew where the stairwells were. He knew where they'd just been. He knew what was happening above him, the helicopters pinging back and forwards, where they were and what they needed to do next. And the fact that he was so calm, that Kiwi humour coming out again, is like, hey, what's going on here? Because he recognised it. But man, to have that ability and to be able to have that happen at the time when it did, for him to be able to be in that state to lead his team is incredible. So I just wanted to say that's awesome work. Awesome work, Jamie. You and the team. I know you would never take that. It was not all about you. You're doing what you do to share the story of Steve and your team members that did this incredible work, and then everybody else that was part of it, the crew that was there, that you guys had been teaching but knew that you had to take the lead on because they weren't prepared to be able to take on that task. And so thankfully yourself and the team and that were there, and you had this flow state that you hit and that you entered, which helped you and your team to do what you did.
World War I soldiers getting out over the top in the trenches, not knowing. You thought before, when you're briefing your guys in the stairwell to take the roof, that you thought about those World War I soldiers getting out over the top in the trenches, not knowing what their fate was. To what extent does patriotism of being a Kiwi motivate you?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, it's everything. Every time I see the New Zealand flag, I'm proud that I'm representing New Zealand. I mean, this type of work that we're doing overseas doesn't land with all Kiwis. And, that's the way it is. I respect everyone's position on this, but yeah, definitely, when we're getting on the plane and we're leaving New Zealand, there's definitely that sense of patriotism. I don't think that, patriotism for our armed forces is generally that big in New Zealand. It's bigger for our sports teams. That's just the way it is. But yeah, we definitely, that definitely sits inside me and drives me on and is why I'm, I resign myself to the fact that we're either going to get, me personally, I can only speak for myself personally, is that, I'm either going to get seriously injured or killed here. And is it worth it? And for me, it's worth it from the perspective of being a New Zealander or representing New Zealand. And it's definitely worth it from the perspective of, helping or protecting people that can't protect themselves.
I love what he shared there. I don't think he's alone. I think any operator would have very similar, if not identical, thoughts on that. It is worth it. You're going into fight to help people that are unable to defend or fight for themselves. It's a huge drive. That was at least a huge drive for me in terms of wanting to go into the unit and serve. Patriotism, he made I think a good point. The patriotism in terms of for the Defence Force is probably more, there's probably more of it for sports teams, which is fine, it's okay. And the work that Special Forces do, regardless of which country they're from, and he's speaking specifically for NZ, his experience is that it doesn't necessarily land that well with Kiwis here. And I don't know why that is. That may be because we're a smaller country and they may look at, or people here that aren't familiar or that don't know what this life is like or what it's about, may be unfamiliar or don't understand why a small country and people from this country would go and fight in those conflicts and those wars, especially, if and when things come out later on that there were no weapons of mass destruction and none were ever found, and all sorts of conspiracies and things come out. It can be deflating and cause people to be severely skeptical of the reasons why war happens in the first place. So, yeah, but that's just how it is. Like Jamie speaks, very matter of fact. That's just the way it is, and so be it.
You talk about how the Kiwis operated a bit differently. You say that other forces saw the job as to simply destroy the enemy, even when it wasn't always clear who the enemy was, and didn't always stop to consider the impact of their actions on people who might not be combatants. I mean, did you feel uncomfortable about the actions of other forces over there?
I can't speak for other forces. For us, we do have a hearts and minds mindset, particularly in the regiment. I mean, that's our base. We go all the way back to Malaya. That's what we're doing in Malaya. And also, we're doing a lot of UN operations around the world as an NZTF, complete. Timor was another thing that we all transitioned through as well. So it's sort of embedded into us to have that, genuine connection with the local population. That's how we approach things. And, every time we sort of drove into a village, whether they're hostile or not, we'd make sure that we were having those conversations with the right people, just asking the questions that we're, there to answer. Just being genuinely connecting with people and trying to have that rather than rolling in behind armour, being all staunch, keeping people at arm's length, being hostile. It's never going to bode well.
You would have seen.
That's a great point that he mentions. That hearts and minds approach is important. It's also maybe a little bit off topic here, but again, this is why I get to have the luxury to add my 2 cents worth in. Outside of the Defence Force, we haven't got to the transition yet, so I'm wondering if we're hoping that we get to that part soon, because I'd be interested, really keen to hear his thoughts around transition and some of the challenges that he may have encountered. But where was I going? The piece around the hearts and minds, that's an important part no matter where you are, I've found anyway. So coming out of the military, trying to genuinely connect with people, whether it be an employer, whether it be at an interview, whether it be once you're employed as staff, with connecting with other staff, connecting with other stakeholders, community, etc. The skills that, at least for me, that I was able to draw from the unit have been so not only life-changing but helpful outside of the Defence Force, to be able to try to connect with people, try to genuinely connect with them, and either form a partnership, a relationship, or build and develop a relationship, or strengthen one that may have been fractured due to past differences with other people. And then you know what it's like when you're having to come into a role and the relationship isn't good through no fault of your own, but through the whatever happened prior to. And then there's this perception and some standoff thinking, is this person going to be the same? How am I going to work with them? Now it's a whole new person. Are they going to be the same, or are they going to be worse? But needing to utilize those skills of hearts and minds, going in with a people-focused approach first, people-centric approach first, has always proved to go down really well. Doesn't mean that it's always been easy. There's typically some challenges or some hurdles to get over, but having that approach, like what Jamie's just described, has definitely set myself up, and I know many others, up in good stead to carry on down the track, not only in the Defence Force, but life outside. Anyway.
Some of the reports and things, I mean, the SAS was, the Australian SAS were in trouble, weren't they, with the Spiriton report? There were nearly 40 murders of civilians, 25 Australian Defence Force personnel involved in what they said were basically war crimes. Did that surprise you to see that sort of stuff come out? These were incidents that happened in 20...
I'm not sure how or why the host is going down the path of wanting to question or bring up the Brereton report in regards to the Australian Special Forces. I'm not sure what that has, if that has anything to do with Jamie's incident at the Intercontinental, but we'll see anyway.
2012, 2013, and it's really just being sort of reported on now.
Yeah, it does surprise me. I mean, although we have 3 SASs in the world, New Zealand, the Australians and the British, we're all separate entities. We're not connected in any other way except for the word SAS. So yeah, that was surprising, but I guess we just got to let the legal process play out and the due diligence to go.
And we'll
across
talk
that.
about how you used lawyers in the SAS, which was quite striking. But just before I get to that, did you read the book Hit and Run that Nikki Hager and John Stevenson wrote? Largely, the inquiry found that the principal allegations in that book were not accurate, that they weren't revenge operations. This is in the Turgaran Valley, but that there may have been mistakes made. Were you in that operation back in 2010? No. So not something that you followed at all.
Not really. It's I'm not too sure where I was at that point. I think I was out. I think I was out when that inquiry was conducted. So yeah, no, I know what we do. And I have full confidence of the boys that they're doing the right thing on the ground. If there's anything that is outside of our culture or the law of armed conflict or our rules of engagement, we dial in it pretty quick.
So you feel...
I love how he's responded there to not only the Australian question about the Australian Special Forces, and was he surprised? Yeah, okay, surprised, fair enough. But then also hosts, media trying to slip in other bits and pieces with this hit and run book story, whatever it is, in and around NZ operators, and trying to probe and get a bite, trying to capture something to get something to use for the media. So it's a tricky space, man, for anybody when you're dealing with and communicating with media. For whatever reason, they look to try to, it seems to me that they look to try to throw a few banana peels down to trip people up, or to get them to say something that they can then use in another interview down the track with somebody else and go, well, so-and-so said, or former Special Air Service, New Zealand Special Air Service Commander Jamie Pennell stated that, and then they'll go back and have a look at the transcript and read word for word what the person has said. I don't know why media feels that they need to do that, or why they do that. They can say it's about trying to get to the truth and that people have a right to know, all that stuff, whatever helps them sleep at night. I think a lot of it is BS. I think a lot of them just do it because they're nosy and they have nothing better to do than trying to pick holes. What I can say, just in this piece here, my observation, and I would be completely surprised as well if there were any SAS operators in Australia, New Zealand, or the UK that didn't operate with the integrity that the units are known for having. The other part is that, like Jamie touched on, if you observe that as an operator, guys, from my experience anyway, I can only speak for myself, I would call that out. Like, that's, you're playing with the big boys, right, in the unit. You may not be a big boy, you may not be big physically, you may not be imposing, but this and your spine combined together, if you see something that's not right, you're going to speak up about it. Well, at least I would, and I'm pretty confident, based on the conversations that I've had with individuals within the unit, that they would do the same. And the other piece in and around speaking up when something isn't right, from my experience, when we deployed on operations, had a few contacts. We had one in particular that was probably the largest one that I'd ever been in anyway. And by the end of it, there was probably more than a dozen that had surrendered to us, to our patrol, to our team, and to our troop, that had surrendered to our troop, or at least half of our troop. Was it our whole troop? Or a couple of patrols? It was either our whole troop or 2 patrols within our troop that the enemy that we faced anyway they surrendered to. And, we could have dropped them. We could have dropped them there and left them in the desert. Nobody would know except for us, except for the team that I was with, except for myself and those men that we were with. But like Jamie spoke about, the rules of engagement, anything that goes outside that, they're going to jump on that pretty quick. When they surrendered, I don't think I was alone in thinking, these guys, we let them go, they're going to reorg, regroup, get themselves sorted out, get all their equipment back together, and they are going to be better prepared to attack us next time, and or potentially ambush us, and or potentially take us out. So I personally was conflicted with, these bastards have this, excuse my language, have just tried to take us out. They've just tried to kill us. They've been firing RPGs set in airburst, they're firing mortars, they're firing small arms or 7.62 in our direction, trying to hit us, trying to kill us, trying to take us out. And we are now going to be letting these ones go that have surrendered. And they've got all this intelligence about us now, and they're looking at us staunch as. They didn't seem to have any fear, the ones that I looked at, and it was quite, it hit different. I was like, man, these guys are different. Like, they look like they give 0 Fs at all about us. I'm surprised they've even surrendered. And then I started thinking, all the stuff going through my head, then are they surrendering just so that they can get a better idea of what we will do? so they can also get a better idea of what we have, what our capability is, what our numbers are, what our equipment looks like, our firepower, etc. Because one of the guys who was awarded a Medal of Gallantry in our team, in my patrol, he took out a couple of their vehicles with the Javelin. Awesome bit of kit. But up until that point, they wouldn't have known that we had that capability. Yeah, it would have literally put a rocket up them by taking out their vehicles and anybody that was in those vehicles. But the fact that a number of them dismounted and started formulating their assault with the use of indirect fire and mortars and RPGs and that sort of thing, and then incorporating their small arms fire, it would have been a rude awakening once that happened. So you have all these things. Are they surrendering so that they can get all this intel? This is intelligence for them, right? And all the men that I was with, nobody dropped anybody. Everybody that surrendered were treated the way POWs should be treated. But at the same time, they were also afforded a lot more freedom because we didn't take anybody. We took one person. That person got put on my vehicle, and then the interpreter, and we drove off, got into space, interrogated, got some information, or spoke to the person to get the information. Then we let that person go. Yes, it was in the middle of a sandstorm. Yes, his hands were still cable tied together. Didn't care about that. He wasn't murdered. The other more than a dozen men that surrendered with him weren't murdered. We let them all go. Don't know what happened to them. Hopefully they left and went, stuff that for a joke. We're not doing that again. I'm done. I'm out of here. I'm just going to go to my family and we're going to live our life. I like to think that's what they did. But more than likely, they probably regrouped, reorganized, got back into the fight again. Same as any of us would have done if something happened to us in a similar fashion. So, yeah, always media looking for angles around bad behavior and things like that. Don't get me wrong, things probably have happened in the past in other areas. But man, I'd be so surprised if operators didn't jump on that quick, like Jamie has said, and try to address that and get that sorted out. Anyway, I've spoken again longer than I should have, but had a bit to share on that point just with regards to the media's line of questioning and the awesome way in which Jamie's responded.
Feel sitting here today that there wasn't anything that you guys did that you would not have thought ethically or in the rules of war that you should be doing?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I've got full confidence with the boys.
I was staggered to read that when
Perfect answer. Yep, full confidence.
you were pursuing high-value targets that you took lawyers in with you, and you write one operation that these lawyers are there and the helicopters took off and these guys were just standing there in the middle of the night with their briefcases and their suits and their good shoes up the mountains. You seriously take lawyers up to do that stuff? Just to make sure that when you're taking a high-value target, this is someone that often the US wanted taken out, right? Or that the local...
High-risk arrest is generally the wording
and
we use.
what do the lawyers do? I mean, like...
well, essentially we're trying to develop a system whereby a very solid, robust system of, when the CRU go out and do their high-risk arrests, that everything is seen when they're represented in court. There's no comeback. They should be doing the right thing all of the time. And that's...
It's the world we live in, eh? Sorry to cut off the bro, Jamie. But yeah, I guess that's the level to where things are escalating to because of these reports that come out, because of the accusations that come out. Now, I'll react to Ben Roberts-Smith's video later on, so I won't do that here. But based on this interview and what the host is asking and what Jamie's talking about and what they've been doing, like when I was in, we weren't taking no lawyers out on any jobs. But that seems to be the nature of war, of what we're sitting in now. Maybe not the case for all countries. It likely isn't the case for all countries. But here's an example where New Zealand SAS operators are doing that very thing to make sure that there's no comeback, that they're protected. And that's sad, to be honest, that they're having to go to that extent. It's my 2 cents on that.
It's for us as well. And, if people are taken off the target, then they see how they're treated. So there's no ambiguity at all. We've got legal representation from the Afghan government, and we think that was the best, at the time when we thought that was the best course of action.
So in 2021, like 20 years after 9/11, the US bails really, and the Taliban is back now. How do you feel about that? You put your life on the line, with your mates in the regiment. How do you feel now that the Taliban are back in control?
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate, but again, my sort of mindset is that, we gave the Afghan people 20 odd years of relative peace. And, if they did the work and understood history, they would have taken advantage of that 20 years, got themselves educated, left, maybe gone to another country if they could, can't speak for everyone, and then got a better life. I mean, for us to have any effect on a country like that, we only have to look back in time and know that it would take hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and that's never going to happen. We don't have the economy for it. Public opinion is going to sway the government to make sure we're not in there for that long. So I'm hoping, and I'm sure there's a lot. We do have a lot of interpreters that have come back that work with NZDF, and I can only speak for that, but there'll be other Afghans as well that have gone to other countries and prospering now.
Yeah, because you worked with, I think, about 200 crisis response unit CRU members, and I think you're right, only maybe 70 got out when the capital fell, and the rest were either killed or fled. I mean, again, that must be pretty gutting. You worked closely with these guys.
Yeah, that hit me pretty hard, but I can't dwell in it. It's that was. I only found that out recently, to be honest. It was towards the end of this year. The start of this year, I found out that only 70 made it out. The rest had either, like you say, fled or been killed. But we know the game we play, and potentially this could be an outcome. And so I'm sure it wouldn't have come as any surprise when those guys got caught that things weren't going to work out well for them.
The video comes on there for a bit, but that's all right. I think we've got it back up. Yep, that's still recording. That's what happens when I'm talking too long. So that's unfortunate that is something that happened. You've sacrificed, you've worked through a lot of stuff together with these people, and then, to hear the news. Unfortunately, Jamie just heard it not that long ago in relation to when this video was and this interview was done. That would have, like you said, it hit him hard. Would have been gutting for him to know that a number of those people that he served and worked with, that he helped train and develop, had been captured and killed. So yeah, it's tough.
I want to spend the last 5 or 6 minutes on delving a bit deeper into the psyche of an SAS soldier. Is there a typical mindset? I mean, could you be a middle-class, well-adjusted guy on his way to becoming an accountant who becomes a SAS soldier? Or did the people you see have something in them that was a bit different, maybe even a bit broken, that they were searching for something? And what are your observations in that respect?
I guess it comes down to your personal drive. And so where does the fire come from? And it's different for everyone. For me, it was proving myself to myself, and foolishly at the time, as a young fellow, myself to others. I wanted to prove myself to people that I knew who doubted me down the battalion. That seemed to drive me on at that particular point in time, and even further on in my career, probably 5 to 7 years after that, I was still doing that until I realised it's probably not the greatest mindset, but whatever works.
Your parents separated when you were about 8 or so.
Again, he's just cut him off when he's trying to go down this aspect of answering the question that he originally asked him. Could you be this accountant, well-adjusted person going in? And then he's explaining that, but then he's coming in with another question. But when he's speaking about the mindset and where your drive comes from, it's so interesting to hear, just to hear and see the common threads that bind operators together in the Special Forces sense and in the Special Forces area. A lot of the same wording, a lot of the similar characteristics, traits, a lot of the same values, some of the same hardships, maybe in terms of backgrounds and upbringings and that sort of thing, which just, in my experience anyway, seems to help galvanize people that are fortunate to serve in those spaces. And it's a great thing to witness and see and be a part of, albeit for a brief period of time. You know, you'd always want it to be longer than what you have the opportunity or than what you serve for. But you look back and you're grateful for all the moments in the time that you had.
Something?
Correct, yeah.
You were with your mum mainly, you had a couple of older sisters, I think, but mainly you and your mum. I mean, did you see those kinds of patterns? I don't want to get into psycho battle here.
My mum is highly independent and very focused as well, so I'm guessing a lot of that came from her. But selection, you can't hide from selection. You know what I mean? You can't hide yourself away. It'll bring out the worst in you. So you have to manage all that.
It'll discover your demons, you know.
It'll discover your demons, and it'll reveal exactly who you are. And that's the best part of it. But again, it's what drives you, like what is driving you to get through that. And the fantasy doesn't meet the reality. You know, it's what we say, you know, is we're weeding out the dreamers on selection course. You know, so you don't know who can do it unless you turn up. You're never going to know. If you think you've got it, you know, you could get a whole lot of, you know, Highland adventure races or, you know, I don't know, Olympic athletes and that kind of thing, get them to the start line. But you know, when we take the food and sleep away, that's enough, you know, for a lot of people. They may not pass the second day because they believe that's what they need and they don't.
You talk about the sense of brotherhood in the regiment, and I'm wondering whether maybe that's even part of the thing that you're searching for.
100%, probably. Yeah, I think so.
You're incredibly close with Steve Askin. We've mentioned him here today, and he tragically died helping people again in the Port Hills fire when the monsoon wraps around the rotor blade. That must have been pretty tough for you.
Yep. Yeah, it was very hard. I refused to believe it when I first got told about it. The man could get himself out of any situation. He's highly capable.
He was shot in the head at one point, and you had to tell him, "Have you had enough yet?" Sort of thing, was it?
Yeah. And we had a laugh.
He laughed about it.
Yeah, right after. Because I said, "Have you had enough yet?" And then he smiled at me because I was just looking at him, and I laughed.
And his ears hanging off.
Hospital. Yeah. And I said, "You're going to hospital?" And he said, "No, I'm good." And I said, "No, you're going to hospital." But that's the kind of, you know, human humility is one of our tenets.
Sure.
And so that's sort of
you laughed at the time with dark humour, but you cried.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So that.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. So obviously when it sort of hit me, and you know, I knew he was gone. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I was definitely crying at home, and then it happened again in front of my family, and then it happened again without me having any control, you know, in front of the boys in the regiment.
And there's nothing wrong with that. None of those boys would have said anything to him. And it's interesting that the host asked the question, like, "And you cried?" Like, and? So what if he cried? Of course he cried, because he loved the guy. He's family, you know? You're going to cry when you lose somebody that you care about, that you love, that you respect. Yeah, it just seemed like a bit of a weird question, or the way he asked, "And you cried?" What do you expect? You want me to laugh and celebrate? Anyway.
But, you know, that's because that's how much he meant to me. I mean, he's a great New Zealander. And if people saw what I saw in terms of his bravery, particularly that night in the Intercontinental, but also, you know, not even a week later, the type of guy he is, he, you know, if I was going to, you know, pick a team, he'd be the first man, straight up. Family man of faith, very strong, knows what he wants to do, committed. Just yeah, he's one of those guys that it sort of put a question mark. I was thinking, you know, one of the things I was struggling with for many years was, you know, why did they have to take him? You know, of all the people in the world, why would you take away Steve Askin? You know, and then I thought about his children as well, like what they're going to miss. But fortunately, his brother is almost like a replica of Steve Askin, so it's the only saving grace.
Final question. You're out of the SAS now. You're doing this educational work with young men. Just more broadly, what has an SAS soldier got to teach young men and to teach all of us?
Oh, a lot. I think my experiences are completely different to most people's experiences. They're very high end. I mean, the stuff that I'm doing with the Learning in the Outdoors program at Dilworth, and everything else I've done in my life is almost perfectly aligned to what we're doing with the boys out there, you know, and building. Essentially, you know, we do stuff around leading self, you know, a lot around resilience, you know, self-efficacy, self-confidence, and bits and pieces. And I sort of inject in, you know, little stories here and there to help the boys understand from my perspective, you know.
You got a few of those.
A few, yeah.
Hey, thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much.
No worries.
That was 30 minutes with Jamie Pennell. This is...
Close that off there. This looks like it's about to run out of space on there, but great interview, great human being, Jamie. Yep, that's paused, that's stopped. So you're only going to hear my audio now because the laptop is still going, but the camera has run out of capacity in that on there on the mobile phone. But that's all good. This was a great interview with Jamie. It's good to see him on here. I'm looking forward to doing a reaction to one of his interviews where he has more time and isn't so rushed to speak, and he has the time that he needs to be able to articulate what he wants to speak about in response to the questions that are asked of him. But that's cool. I feel privileged to sit and watch and listen and then chime in with some comments from time to time. I do genuinely hope that the comments that I try to add are helpful in some way. But for those that may not enjoy it, or if I'm talking too much, let me know in the comments. Like I want to try to cut that down, but I'm taking in so much when I'm listening to these great individuals speak, and there's so much that we can learn from them. So anyway, thanks for sticking around. I really appreciate your time. Apologies that the other part of the video camera isn't still showing, but it is what it is. Whatever it is that you're going through, whatever struggles you may have, keep smashing, keep turning up, stay in the fight. And until the next video, we'll see you next time.